In this video, I'm going to show you how to vectorize detailed raster art without using Adobe Illustrator's image trace function. The problem with Illustrator's image trace is that it's not very good at translating intricate details like the ones you see here in this image. I tried it myself here, and to save you time, I'll just show you my best result from image trace, and then we can move on to the method that I'm going to show you here today. So I'm just going to zoom into the most detailed parts of this image, just so you can see what we're working with here. We have these really fine black lines. We have these fine white lines in the hair. All over the place, we have this fairly intricate, detailed work, which is actually a perfect example of when Adobe Image Trace won't work very well. So I'll show you in Adobe Illustrator what we're working with just in terms of its best attempt at vectorizing. I really did try to step up all the details in the little settings that you can get in Image Trace, and this is the best it could do. As you can see, you have this loss of detail and quality in the vectors here. You also have this kind of stair-stepping effect where this used to be a perfectly smooth line in the original artwork. So I'm going to do my best to vectorize this artwork better than what Illustrator did here, and we'll see what happens. So to do this, you're going to need Photoshop, and the method that I'm going to show you will only work if you have clearly separate colors in the artwork, and that means no gradients or transparent effects. So as you can see, the artwork that I'm using as our example today has 4 colors: red, black, dark gray, and gray. So I hope this works for you. If you have a unique problem that this does not work for, let me know in the comments, and maybe we can figure out a way of making a video about how to do your unique case. As you can see, we have a nice high res, very clean, high quality file here. And so I think we'll end up with some pretty good vectors here. There's going to be a couple stages. The first one is just going to be separating each of these colors, the red, the black, the dark gray, and the light gray, onto their own layers. That will be stage 1. And then stage 2 will be creating vector paths from each of those separate colors. And then the third stage will be to actually go into Adobe Illustrator so we can combine those vector layers together in a single vector file. You don't need to do the last stage, but it really is easiest to do in Illustrator once you've created the vector paths and the separations and all that in Photoshop first. So the first stage is to isolate each color so that each color can be its own separate layer. We're going to start with black. Black was the easiest color to isolate, and you'll see why as we go deeper and deeper into this process. So first, we're going to use the black and white adjustment layer to remove all the color. So down at the bottom of the layers panel, I'm going to select black and white from this flyout menu, and this will remove any coloring. And so we're just going to crank all these hue sliders all the way to white or all the way to the right to the max. This is in the properties that comes up when you create an adjustment layer. And we're almost done isolating black already. The next thing we want to do is just go back down to the adjustment layers. We're going to add a threshold adjustment layer. And we want to adjust this slider until anything that's not black just disappears. And basically, we want to save as much of that black detail as possible. And the best way to do that is not to slide the slider down too much. Otherwise, you might lose some details. You can see all the way up in here and all these details. As I get threshold all the way to 1, it makes that detail super fine. And so the best rule of thumb here is just to adjust the slider to the exact point that you lose the extra colors or tones there, or values, I should say. So in this case, I found that a value of 127 worked. Again, this was at the threshold before the darker grays started to show up. All right, so with the black layer done, what we can do is I'm going to just duplicate the original art because I'm going to need that for the next step. And then we'll group what we just made. We're going to select all these layers and then hit Command G to create a layer group, and we'll call that black. Now I'm going to hide that black layer so I can see what I'm doing with the next. And I'm just going to drag that art layer over top the black layer group there, just so I can keep track of it easier. Now let's move on to isolating the red layer. This one will be fairly straightforward because of how distinct and saturated the red is. So I'm just going to go to select and hit color range. And right now it has a selection made here. Just so you can see what you're selecting, you can hit image, the little image radio button down here, and then put your eyedropper on something big and obviously red. Now, there are subtle differences between the reds in this image, which is why it's only selecting the heart. But if you adjust the fuzziness setting here, you're going to start seeing more and more of that red detail. Now, just to see what happens, I'm going to crank this all the way to max and see how well that selects all the red. I think if I select it all the way to the max, that is going to do the trick here. So I'm going to hit OK. And then it loads a selection, as you can see from the marquee. And then what I'll do is create a solid fill layer from that selection. So I have the selection made. I'm in my layers panel. I'm going down to adjustment layers again, but this time I'm going to hit solid color. That's the option right at the top. And I want to be able to actually see the new layer that I made and be able to distinguish it from the original art. So I'm going to make it a totally different color. I'll just go with pink, and that will just let me know that I've made the selection well. Now I'm going to turn off my original art here and just see how that lines up with the black layer that I made below. So as you remember, I made this black selection, isolated it all out, and I did that as perfectly as I could. But now when I see the layer that I just made, there's a bit of this white aliasing happening. And that's because the red area, or the area that I made pink, needs to kind of expand out a little bit more. So I'm going to make that correction right now. I'm going to make a selection from the alpha mask that I just made. I'm on this pink color fill layer here, and I'm going to hit Command and just tap that mask. That's the black rectangle. And you can see I loaded a selection from it. Now I'm going to go to Select and Modify and Expand. And I'm going to try expanding this by just 3 pixels, just a little bit. And I'll see if that makes the difference that I need. I'm going to just hide my original pink layer. I'm going to create another pink layer from this same selection. And right now it does look like a mess. I agree. But if I were to multiply that over the black now, you can see that because the pink overlaps the black, when you can see that black shining through, there's none of that white business, none of that aliasing. And that's what we want. So for now, I'm happy with my red isolation. I'm just going to delete the previous color fill that I made because I don't need that anymore. I'm going to move this original art up to the top layer because I'm going to use that for the next color separation. And I'll just put the pink layer in its own layer group so that I can keep track of it, and I'm going to call it red because, as we know, that was originally red. So let's just hide those previous layers. And the next color that we're going to isolate is the dark gray. The dark gray shows up in the wrists or the cuffs, and then it appears just under her neck and in the lips, but it might appear in other places. So I just want to make sure that I know all the places where that's showing up. And an easy way of doing this is to use the color picker tool. I just hit I, but it's up here. And I'm just going to select that color and load that into my current color. And then I'm going to create just a new solid color layer from that fill. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to change the blending mode down to difference. And what this does basically is anywhere there is an overlap of this gray and the exact same color under it, it will show up as black. And that just helps me see where I can find that color. Now, there seems to be a faint outline of the same hue all around in the rest of the art, and that might just be by accident. It's just the way, like when you look at the image, you don't see the gray, but if you zoom in, you can see in the original artwork there's a bit of a blurry edge, and that's called aliasing, and it just happens to be in a very similar hue and value as this lip color here. So that's what we're looking at. Now, my goal here is to do as little manual work as possible. I don't want to go around and have to delete all of these edges myself if I can help it. I might have to, but let's see if I can avoid it. So I'm actually going to disable that solid color layer that I just made. And I'm going to see if I can just remove any color using the black and white adjustment layer, just like I did when I separated the black. So now I'm going to go to select and color range, and I'll just make that image visible and click somewhere where I know that gray is, that dark gray, and that would be the lips. And of course, the fuzziness is too fuzzy. It's selecting everything. If I bring that all the way down to 1, what happens? It looks like we get a nice selection of just the lips and those gray areas with a tiny bit of like speckling here and there. And I think that by doing it this way, we've eliminated most of that edge or aliasing that we would have had to remove by hand. So I'm going to hit OK, and that should have loaded a selection of just those gray areas. That looks good to me. And now I'll just fill it in with a solid color, and that will add color wherever the color range made a selection. And again, just to make this visible and so I can keep track of it, I'm going to color the gray areas yellow. The dark gray areas are going to appear as yellow for now. And I'll just test my work. I'll hide the original art, and I will hide that black and white adjustment layer. I will then put the red layer on and the black layer, and that looks good to me. You just want to make sure that there's no extra white areas missing between the black and the yellow, and that looks pretty good. And so we'll go with that. Now, I do want to make sure that I clean up as much of that noise as possible, if any of it exists. So if I make this layer actually into a dark color like black, I'll be able to just see wherever those speckles are. And there's really not that much, just these tiny things here. And I think the easiest way to make sure I get rid of those is just to go click on the layer mask for this fill. I'm still on this dark gray layer, but it's I've made it black, but just so we can keep track. I had made that yellow before, so we'll make that yellow just so we can keep track. And I'm going to select just the artwork that I want to keep as closely as possible. I'm just using the lasso here. So that's the face area, and then here around the cuffs. There's really nowhere else in the art. And so with those selected, I'm actually going to invert the selection. I can go to select, inverse, and that will select everything but the lips and those other areas in yellow. And making sure that my layer mask is selected as shown by that white border. I also want to make sure that my background color is black. And now I'm just going to hit delete. And you won't be able to notice, but all those specks everywhere else are gone. There might be a few stragglers here, but for the most part, I just got rid of all those specks. So we can get rid of these adjustment layers. I'll just put this yellow layer in its own group and call it dark gray. And then I'll move the original art layer up, and we'll keep using that as our reference for the next color, which is light gray. So this is our last isolation or color isolation. I did the same process as I did for the dark gray. I duplicated the original art. I used the color picker to sample the light gray area. I created a fill layer from that. And then I set the blending mode to difference to be able to visually locate all the areas in that color. And as you can see, they show up in black. And now I'm going to use levels just to make that contrast more intense. I want to make sure that I really separate out those gray areas from everywhere else in this original artwork. And then I will go to threshold. I'm adding a threshold adjustment layer. So I think if I go up to no higher than a threshold level of 3, I retain as much detail as possible without getting all that extra noise. I'm going to do something a little bit different here than the last couple steps. I'm going to hit Command A just to select all. You can also just go select all from the menu. And then I'm going to go to Edit, Copy Merged. This copies everything I see in the canvas, regardless of what layer it's on. And then I'm going to go to my Channels panel. I'm going to hit the little plus sign at the bottom. It creates a new alpha channel. I'm going to hit Paste and then Command I to invert that. And then I'm going to Command click the alpha thumbnail. And that creates a selection from the white areas. And then I'm going to create a solid color fill from that selection. We'll use a different color this time. We'll use green, this so we can keep track of what's going on. I will create a group from all of this just to keep all that light gray stuff in one folder. And we can just multiply that whole thing over top just to see if we're close. And you can see that there's that white edge or aliasing around the green areas, which should be the light gray. We want to get rid of that white area. We want to close up that gap so it goes right to the black outline. So I'm going to reload a selection from this alpha channel in this green color fill. So I'm just going to hit Command and hit that color fill mask, and that will reload the selection. And I'm going to expand it just a little bit. Let's see if I expand it just by 2 pixels. Does that get me where I need to be without making the art look bad? And maybe I'll make this the original light gray. And I think that looks good. Now we're done the first stage of isolating the colors. There's just a few other things that I'd like to do before we move on to stage 2. So I'm just going to have the black layer isolated on its own. I'm just going to go to Layer, Merge Group, or you can hit Command E as a quick keyboard shortcut. And I'm going to just Command All to select it. I'm going to cut it, Command X. I'm going to my channels again. I'm just going to paste it into my Alpha 1 channel there. I'm going to hit Command I to invert it. And I'm going to Command click that Alpha channel. And then create a solid color from that. And I'll just make it the original black color and hit OK. So in this particular case, black was the only layer that I needed to separate with this alpha mask on a color fill layer. The other layers, I had already pretty much done this. I just needed to make sure that the layers were the right names and the right colors, but otherwise I was good to go with these. But if you need to convert your layers to these alpha masks, you can use the exact same process we used for black. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that if you're converting a layer that's not already black, you need to convert it to black before sending it to an alpha channel. And I'll show you what I mean just with this lighter layer here. So let's just say you have a layer that's just this light color. You've separated it, but you want to create an alpha channel and create that color fill layer like I've done with everything else here. All you have to do is go to an adjustment layer and go to threshold. Of course, this just gets you to a place where you can make sure that your art is perfectly black and white, and just get your threshold level right to the threshold, right to that point. It turns black. And in this case, that's 216. So then I will just do the Command A to select all, and then I'll copy merged, paste onto my alpha channel, invert. Then I Command click the alpha thumbnail, and then I create that solid color fill in the layers, and then I would create the color from there. And then you have that nice, perfect alpha channel mask over a solid fill layer. And so now if you look at all the colors, they line up, they're in the right colors. Of course, there's this little detail up here that is a problem, but we can fix that problem. Let's put the black layer, which is our outline layer, all the way to the top, and it covers over those areas where the edges go beyond. And this is pretty much the completed color separations. So this is stage 1. We have successfully separated the 4 colors onto their own layers. And now from here, we can begin to turn them into vectors. So before we go on to the next step, I want to compare the original artwork with the layer separations that I made. So we're looking at the original artwork here, and then you can see my separations here. Now there is a bit of a color tint, like a yellowish tone to the original artwork that I didn't account for because that was just like the overall background basically. So first of all, you can see that the details are all really preserved in my separations. There's just a few little picky things that if I was going to be detail oriented, which I'm not, but I would go and correct this gray area on the lip highlight, which should be filled in. And then there's just a few of these extra little like dots here, just like little bits of noise that might want to be removed. And you could easily go in on to say the light gray layer and just use the selection tool and just remove those. And even here, I could take a brush and just brush that back in. But I'm not going to go too far down into that just to save a bit of time here. I'll also just take a look at the hands and make sure that I got those all right. So we have the original and then my layers. There's a bit of a glitch in here that I would want to fix. That's easy enough just to use, I guess, a select and then just fill that in. So all in all, I could go in and fix a few details, but it's looking good enough right now. So I think I'm pretty satisfied with my color separations. And now it's time to go into the second stage, which is to create the actual vector paths from each separation. So I'll start with black, and it's pretty simple, but it might be new to you, so please follow along closely. I'm just going to hit Command and hit that alpha channel mask or that alpha mask, and that creates a selection. We've done something like that already, but now I'm going to go to the Paths panel. You can find that in Window Paths. I'll just pull this up so you can see it better. And we're going to hit this little button down here that is Make Work Path from Selection. And it's going to take all of that detail and create a vector path from it. And we're just going to call that black. And now we'll do the same with light gray. Command click on the layer mask. And then in the Paths panel, make a work path. And we'll call that light gray. We'll do the same with the other two. So I would recommend saving your work at this point. And now we're going to go and export each of these paths to Illustrator. So the only thing we need to do here is to go to File and then Export Paths to Illustrator. And we'll do this one at a time because that's how Photoshop wants us to do it. I'll just call this black.ai. And then I'm going to go to File, Export Paths to Illustrator, and then light gray. And we'll call this one light gray. And we'll do the same thing for the remaining two colors. Okay, so we are now done in Photoshop. We're going to now go to Adobe Illustrator, and we're going to open all 4 of those vector files that we just exported. You know what, we'll start with the black because that will be the most satisfying. So let's just zoom out here and hit Command A, and you should see all of your black paths here. So with all your paths selected, choose a color to fill them in with. You can, at this point, use the color that you want it to be, which would be black in this case. Now, you can see that the paths are there, but there's no differentiation. It hasn't made any cutouts or anything. So we're going to quickly remedy this by going to the Pathfinder tools, and we're going to hit Exclude, and that will basically repair everything exactly as we want it. We're going to do that again in red. We'll select everything. we'll just choose a red color. And as you can see, it might not be perfect at this point. So we can hit Exclude. And then anywhere where there's a little knockout or a cutout, it fixes that just by going Pathfinder, Exclude. And if you can't find Pathfinder, it will be in Window, Pathfinder. We'll do the same with light gray. We'll just zoom out a bit so we can see. Command A, and then we'll choose some kind of a gray color here. I'll just bring my print swatches out here so I can find a light gray here. And of course, we'll do the Exclude to knock anything out. Looks good. And we'll go to dark gray, and we will Command A to select everything. We'll hit a darker gray here. And again, use Exclude just to make sure that anything that needs to be cut out is cut out. And now it's time to reunite these separated layers into one file. So I'll just do this one by one. I'm in the dark gray. I'll just copy this and then go into the black layer. This will be our target file, and I'll hit Command F. And this should just paste it exactly in place. I'll go to red. I'll copy everything and then Command F, and that should paste that exactly into place. I'm going to go to light gray, select it, copy, Command F to make sure that it is pasted in place. And we'll make sure our layers are in the right order. So we want this red behind the black. And that looks pretty good. And we can save this file now, and we can call it whatever you want. I will call this one Vectorized Girl and save. So we're pretty much done, but before I go and pat myself on the back, let's compare the original to what Image Trace can give us to what I just created. So here is the original artwork. We've seen this a few times. We know the detail going on. Now let's look at the work that I just made. This is my vectorized file that you all just saw me make. So original, mine, and that yellowish color that you see, that was just the background in the original art. You can just add that color as a solid square or rectangle in the background in Illustrator if you want. But otherwise, that looks pretty good. Now let's look at how that looks in the Image Trace result. So this is what Illustrator did. This was its best result. And this is what I gave it. This is what Illustrator did. This is what I made. Illustrator, what I made. Illustrator, what I made. So I hope you can see that even though this method does take more time and you need to fuss around a little bit, it clearly works better than Image Trace. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please let me know in a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I especially want to thank Lilliia Stefanyshyn for providing this artwork as a wonderful example today. So thank you so much. I'll see you in the next one.